The night she closed a $100 billion deal, her husband packed his bags and left. He did not call. He did not wait. He left a note on the kitchen island. 4 sentences, 20 words. 6 years of marriage, reduced to 20 words on a folded piece of paper. She was 7 months pregnant. She stood in that kitchen alone, one hand on her stomach, the other holding the note, and she made a decision. Not a loud decision, not a dramatic one, a quiet one. The kind only a woman who has been underestimated her entire life knows how to make. She did not fall apart. She went to work. And 3 months later, when the merger announcement went public, her husband opened his phone and saw something that stopped his heart cold. His new boss had his last name. Stay with us, because this story is about to show you exactly what happens when a man spends years looking at a woman and never once truly seeing her. Lesson statement. The most powerful thing a woman can do is stop shrinking herself to fit inside a life that was never built to hold her full size. Caroline did not get her power back. She simply stopped giving it away. If this story moved you, if you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, let us know in the comments below. Tell us the moment you stopped making yourself smaller. Your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it today. If you believe every woman deserves to see herself fully and without apology, share this with someone who needs it right now. And if you are new here, subscribe and stay with us. We tell stories about women who survive, rebuild, and rise every single week without fail.
The key slid into the lock at 9:47. Caroline Merritt pushed open the front door and stepped inside. The hallway was dark. That was the first thing. The particular dark of a house that had been empty for hours, not minutes. The air was still. No television murmur from the living room. No sound of Derek moving around in the kitchen, pulling open the refrigerator, asking her how it went. Just silence. She set her bag down on the bench by the door. Her feet were swollen inside her heels. She had been on her feet since 6 that morning, and it was almost 10 at night. And her lower back had been aching since the cab ride home, and she was 7 months pregnant and exhausted in the specific way that only a woman carrying another human being while negotiating the largest financial transaction of her career could understand. She reached for the hall light. The kitchen light was off. She stood there for a moment. Derek always left this kitchen light on when he knew she was working late. It was their small language, a thing they had established in the first year of their marriage without ever discussing it. The light on meant he was thinking of her. The light on meant she was not forgotten, even on the long nights, even on the nights she came home too tired to speak. The light meant something. The dark meant nothing. The dark was just the dark. She called his name. Her voice went out into the house and came back alone. She walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. Her heels clicked against the hardwood. She turned on the kitchen light herself and stood in the sudden brightness, blinking. The counters were clean. The dishwasher was closed. A glass sat in the drying rack from this morning, her coffee mug from 6 a.m., already dry. Everything was exactly as she had left it 14 hours ago. Then she saw the note. It was sitting on this kitchen island, folded once, her name written on the outside in Derek's handwriting, blocky, deliberate letters. Not the shorthand he normally used, not the quick scrawl of a grocery list. Full name. Caroline. Not Care, the way he wrote it on birthday cards. Caroline. The name you use when you have made a decision and you need the other person to understand that the decision is final. She picked it up, unfolded it. 4 sentences. She read them once, then she read them again. Then she set the note face down on the counter and walked to the refrigerator and opened it and stood there, staring at the shelves, not seeing anything. A container of leftover pasta, a half-empty bottle of orange juice, 2 apples in the crisper drawer. She stood there for a full 45 seconds with the cold air coming out at her, and then She closed the refrigerator and picked up the note and read it a fourth time. I cannot do this anymore. I have not been happy for a long time. I am sorry about the timing. That was it. 20 words. 20 words for 6 years. She walked to the bedroom, her heels on the hardwood again, clicking in the quiet. The bedroom was dim, the curtains still drawn from the morning. She turned on the lamp on her side of the bed and looked at his side of the closet. The door was open. Half the hangers were bare. The suits were gone. The dress shirts were gone. The row of shoes on the floor had 3 gaps in it where his favorites had been. He had not ransacked the closet. He had packed it, deliberately, methodically, in the way of a man who had thought about this for a long time and finally executed on the plan. He had packed while she was at work. He had packed while she was in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor, sitting across from Nora Ashworth and her team of 6 attorneys, signing the final term sheet on a merger worth $100 billion. Her hand had been steady. She had signed her name cleanly, precisely, the way she did everything. She had shaken hands all around. Henry Caldwell had squeezed her shoulder and said, quietly, "That was the best work of your career, and possibly mine." And Derek had been here, in this apartment, packing his suits into a suitcase, choosing which shoes to take. She sat down on the edge of the bed, his side. The pillow still had the faint impression of his head from this morning. She placed one hand on her stomach. The baby was quiet right now, settled low, the way she sometimes settled in the evenings. 7 months, 28 weeks, the size of a head of cauliflower, according to the pregnancy app she checked every Sunday. She sat very still. "Okay," she said, out loud, to the room, to herself, to the small person inside her who would never know what this night had cost. "Okay." But it was not okay. She knew it was not okay, even as she said it. It was the specific not okay of a life that had just broken open without warning, without preparation, with 20 words on a folded piece of paper and half-empty hangers swinging slightly in the draft from the heating vent. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She looked at the screen. A text from Donna. "Champagne is literally chilling in my office fridge. You are an absolute legend. Call me when you are done celebrating." She stared at the text for a long time. $100 billion, 20 words. Both of these things were true simultaneously, and they existed in the same body, in the same moment, in this bedroom that smelled faintly of cedar cologne and emptiness. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She stood up, went to the bathroom, turned on the shower. Very hot. The kind of hot she was technically not supposed to use during pregnancy, the kind Dr. Sohn had mentioned gently at the last appointment. She turned it on anyway, and then she sat down on the cold tile floor, fully dressed, blazer still buttoned, heels still on, and she let the steam rise around her. The ink stain on her left cuff blurred in the humidity. She had gotten it during the signing, a small imperfection on the best day of her professional life. She thought about the 4 sentences. "I cannot do this anymore." How long was anymore? She reached for the word like she reached for a number in a financial model. What was the baseline? What was the trajectory? When did the line cross from hard to impossible? She thought about the last 6 months. Derek had been quieter, more distracted. She had noticed this and filed it under stress at work, under the general difficulty of a marriage in which both people were often exhausted, under the category of things that would improve when the deal was done and she had more time to be present. She had been so certain she was right about that. "I have not been happy for a long time. A long time. Not lately, not recently. A long time." He had been specific about that. He had chosen those words carefully enough to mean something, I'm sorry about the timing. She put her hand over the ink stain on her cuff. The timing. She had spent 10 months working toward today. He had spent some portion of those same months planning to leave. And he had chosen today. The day she came home with $100 billion and an ink stain and swollen feet. Maybe he had known. Maybe he had tracked the deal timeline the way she tracked deal timelines and chosen the closing date deliberately. Or maybe, and this was somehow worse, he had not thought about the deal at all, had not known or registered that today was the day she had been building toward for 10 months, the day her career had been pointing at like a compass, the day everything crystallized. If he had chosen today to hurt her, that was cruelty. If he had simply not known, had not been paying enough attention to know, that was something she did not have a clean word for yet. The steam filled the bathroom. Her blazer was damp now. Her heels were still on. The baby kicked, once hard, against her palm. I know, Caroline whispered. She sat on the tile floor until the hot water ran out. Then she changed into loose clothes and lay down on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling for 4 hours without sleeping, while the city outside did its ordinary nighttime things, indifferent and continuous the way cities always are. At 3 in the morning, she got up and went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea she did not drink. She stood at the island with the note still face down beside her mug, and she thought, tomorrow I will call Donna. Tomorrow I will figure out what comes next. Tonight I am just going to stand here and let this be real. The kitchen light was on. She had turned it on herself. Morning came in gray and ordinary. Caroline had not slept. She knew this in her body, the way she knew everything by now, in her body. Through the specific weight of it, the heaviness behind her eyes, the lower back ache that had shifted from dull to sharp sometime around 4 a.m. She made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the street below come alive with its morning business. Dog walkers, a delivery truck, a woman in a yellow coat walking very fast. She had made a list. Not on paper, in her head, which was where she kept everything important. She had been making it since approximately midnight, standing at the window, lying on the bed, sitting at the kitchen island. It was a list of signs. Not the kind of signs that required interpretation, the kind that, when assembled in sequence, formed a picture so clear and complete, she wondered, with a cold and specific wonder, how she had managed not to see it. She started at the beginning. Not the beginning of the marriage, the inflection point. 8 months ago, she had come home on a Thursday evening, still in her work clothes, carrying a folder of preliminary materials on a new prospect. She had sat down at the kitchen table, across from Derek, who was eating dinner and watching something on his phone, and she had said, I was shortlisted today for the Whitmore account, the biggest deal the firm has ever pursued. He had looked up from his phone. That sounds like it is going to be a lot of hours, he said. Not congratulations. Not that is incredible. Not I knew they would pick you. He had heard the news of her most significant professional opportunity and immediately calculated what it would cost him in terms of her time and attention. He had done this out loud. He had not noticed that was what he was doing. She had laughed it off. She had said something like, yes, it is going to be intense, and changed the subject. She had filed the response away under he is tired, under he has had a difficult week, under the long list of folders she kept for the things she chose not to examine too closely. She was very good at filing things away. God, I was so good at not seeing what was right in front of me. The thought arrived fully formed and clear and not gentle at all. She did not push it away. She let it land. She thought about the night she told him about the pregnancy. 8 weeks along, She had made his favorite dinner, roast chicken with the potatoes, the way he liked, and set the table properly, and poured him a glass of wine she could not share, and told him, over dinner, watching his face. He had gone very still. "We did not plan this," he said. "Not we are going to be parents. Not I am scared, but I am here. We did not plan this." As if a baby was a missed deadline, a scheduling error. She had spent the next 4 weeks converting his ambivalence into participation. She had framed his shock as understandable, his distance as processing, his silence in the evenings as him adjusting to a new reality. She had done this work so efficiently, so quietly, so completely that she had almost convinced herself it was normal, that most women did this, that this was simply what it meant to be a partner. I made myself smaller to fit inside a life that was never going to be big enough for me anyway. She said it to the kitchen. The kitchen did not argue. She thought about the Google searches. She had been making them for 4 months. At 3 in the morning, when she could not sleep, when the house was quiet and Derek was asleep, and she was lying awake trying to understand the persistent low-level wrongness she felt in her own marriage. She had searched. Is it normal to feel alone in your marriage? Signs your husband resents your success. How to balance career and marriage when your partner feels left behind. Always framed as her problem. Always starting from the assumption that his discomfort was her responsibility to fix. She had never searched. Is my husband pulling away because of another person? She did not know what that said about her. She thought it probably said something about the specific blind spot of a woman who loves someone, and therefore unconsciously rules out the worst explanations first. Her phone buzzed. Donna, again. Okay, you are starting to worry me. Call me. Caroline looked at the text, looked at it again, then typed, "Can you come over?" 3 dots appeared immediately. On my way. She opened Derek's email while she waited. She knew his password. They had shared it early in the marriage, the way couples share small things, and neither of them had ever changed the arrangement. She opened it not because she planned to spy, but because something in her, the same systematic instinct that drove her due diligence process, the same refusal to proceed without full information, knew there was more to find. The inbox was mostly ordinary. Work emails, a chain about a golf tee time, a newsletter he had never unsubscribed from. She scrolled without a clear target, reading subject lines. Then she found the receipt, the Harrington. Thursday, dinner for 2. The date was 6 weeks ago. She opened the email fully. It was a reservation confirmation, 8 o'clock. The name on the reservation was Merritt. He had used his own name. She knew the Harrington. She had walked past it dozens of times, candles in the window, a maitre d' in a dark jacket. The kind of restaurant you go to when you want someone to be impressed. Not a work dinner restaurant, not a meet the client restaurant, a first impression restaurant. 6 weeks ago, she had been in Chicago on due diligence. She had texted him from the hotel at 11 o'clock at night. "Miss you," she had written. He had replied within 2 minutes. "You too." She closed the laptop. She was still sitting exactly as she had been, hands flat on the counter, breathing evenly when Donna knocked. The knock came at 7:20 in the morning. Donna arrived with a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over and the expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was finally, with grief and relief in equal measure, being permitted to set it down. She came in. She saw the note on the island, face down. She picked it up, read it, set it back down. She did not say anything for a moment. "How long?" Caroline asked. Donna did not pretend she did not understand the question. She sat down on the stool across from Caroline and wrapped both hands around the coffee mug Caroline placed in front of her, and she said, "I saw them together at the Greystone fundraiser in February. They were being careful, but not careful enough. February. 10 months ago. Caroline absorbed this number. She did not throw anything. She did not cry. She absorbed it the way she absorbed difficult data in a deal room, carefully, with the full weight of its implications, turning it over to examine every surface. "You did not tell me," she said. "You were just starting the Whitmore process, and then you told me about the pregnancy." Donna stopped. Started again. I kept telling myself I was wrong, that it would stop, that he would figure out what he was throwing away. He figured out what he was throwing away, Caroline said. He decided it was not worth it. Donna reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out her phone. She placed it on the counter, screen up, sliding it across to Caroline. It was a photograph, slightly blurry, taken at a distance, a fundraiser room, people in evening clothes, soft lighting. In a corner, partially turned away from the room, stood Derek. His hand was at the small of a woman's back. Close, proprietary. The woman was young, light-haired, turned slightly so her face was visible. Caroline studied the photograph. She knew that face. Paige Holloway, 28 years old. Marketing coordinator at Westfield Partners. Caroline knew this because she had reviewed every employee roster at Westfield Partners as part of her due diligence process. She had looked at hundreds of names and faces in spreadsheets over the course of 10 months, and that face had been in a headshot attached to an organizational chart, and now it was in a blurry photograph of her husband's hand on a woman's back at a party Caroline had not attended because she had been working on a deal. She was quiet for a moment. "Westfield Partners?" she said. Donna frowned. "What about it? He works at Westfield Partners." "I know. So?" Caroline looked at the photograph for one more second. Then she set the phone down carefully. She thought about the organizational chart she had helped design, the new structure of the merged entity, the division that would absorb Westfield Partners. The title she had been offered 2 days ago, Chief Integration Officer. "He does not know," she said. Donna stared at her. "Know what?" Caroline looked up. "That Westfield Partners is the firm I just absorbed." The silence in the kitchen was complete. Donna set down her coffee mug very slowly. "You mean—" "He works at the company I just spent 10 months acquiring," Caroline said. "As of the merger announcement, which goes public in approximately 3 weeks, Derek Merritt is an employee of the merged entity I will be leading." Donna's mouth opened, then closed. "He left you last night," she said slowly, "not knowing that you just became his boss, not knowing any of it," Caroline said. "He does not know the name of my client. I stopped telling him work details 18 months ago because he stopped being interested. He knows I was working on a large deal. He does not know which firm. He has never asked." She said this without particular emotion. It was simply a fact, a data point that, placed in context with every other data point, formed a picture of a marriage in which two people had been living in increasingly separate worlds while sharing the same address. Donna looked at the note on the island, then back at Caroline. "What do you want to do?" Caroline thought about this. The honest answer was that she wanted to sit on the floor and stay there for a while. The practical answer was something else. "I need to call a lawyer," she said, "and I need to go to the board meeting this afternoon." "What board meeting?" Henry called yesterday after the signing. "They want to discuss the organizational structure, specifically my role in it." Donna was quiet. Then, "Caroline, you are 7 months pregnant and your husband left you 12 hours ago. I know. You do not have to go today. I know that too." Caroline reached for the paper bag Donna had brought and looked inside it. 2 croissants, a small container of butter. She pulled them out and set them on the counter. "I am going anyway." After Donna left at noon, Caroline showered for the second time in 24 hours. This time she stood, not sat. This time the water was cool. She stood in it and thought about the marriage in the specific, forensic way that grief sometimes gives you access to, clearly, without the softening filters of love and hope. She thought about the night Derek had introduced her at his firm's holiday party. "This is Caroline," he had said. "She is in finance. Nothing else? Not the firm name, not the title, not the scope of what she did, which was, at that point, already significant. She is in finance. Like a personality quirk, like a hobby. She had smiled and shaken hands and not corrected him. She had done this dozens of times, in dozens of rooms. She had made herself a sketch of herself so that the people around Derek would not feel uncomfortable. So that Derek would not feel uncomfortable. She had been so committed to his comfort that she had accidentally erased herself from her own life. I was not invisible. I made myself invisible. There is a difference. She dried off and put on the good charcoal blazer, the one from 8 years ago that still fit over the pregnancy with some effort, the one she had worn for her first major presentation. She zipped it, stood in front of the mirror. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had not slept. She also looked, she thought, exactly like herself. She picked up her bag and walked out. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor at 1:58 in the afternoon. Caroline walked off the elevator and down the corridor toward the main conference room. The carpet was the deep charcoal gray of a firm that takes itself seriously. The afternoon light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows and lit the whole east side of the building in pale gold. She had walked this corridor hundreds of times. Today it felt different. It felt, she thought, like the first time she had understood what she was walking toward. Henry Caldwell stood when she entered the conference room. He always stood for her. It was an old-fashioned gesture, and she had always found it quietly moving. Beside him, already seated, was Nora Ashworth. Nora Ashworth was 55 years old, iron gray hair, cut short, still posture, the particular stillness of a woman who had been in every version of a difficult room and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She looked at Caroline the way that some women of her generation looked at younger women who had made it through something, with recognition and with the specific warmth of a person who remembers what it cost. "Ms. Merritt," she said, "I have been looking forward to this meeting for weeks." "Likewise," Caroline said. She sat down. They worked for 90 minutes. The organizational chart, the integration timeline, the structure of the new executive leadership team. Henry laid out the proposal, and Nora's lead attorney walked through the contractual specifics. And Caroline asked 12 precise questions and received 12 satisfactory answers, and one answer she pushed back on and was right to push back on, and everyone in the room knew it. At the end of 90 minutes, the proposal on the table was this. Upon return from maternity leave, Caroline Merritt would assume the role of Chief Integration Officer of the merged entity, a newly created senior executive position, responsible for the structural absorption of Westfield Partners and 2 additional acquired firms. The most complex organizational work of the merger, the work that required the deepest understanding of the deal architecture, the work that would place her, functionally and formally, as the senior executive responsible for the professional futures of every employee in the absorbed organizations, including the employees of Westfield Partners, including one Derek Merritt, VP of Institutional Markets, who that morning had presumably woken up at his parents' house, believing he had successfully exited his marriage and was now free to begin the next chapter of his life. She signed where she was asked to sign. Henry walked her to the elevator afterward, and at the elevator doors, he turned to her and said, with the particular warmth of a man who had watched her work for 8 years and never doubted her, You built this. Every piece of it. You should know that. Thank you, Henry, she said. She meant it. In the elevator down, alone, she pressed her back against the mirrored wall and closed her eyes. 30 seconds. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds. Then the doors opened, and she walked out into the lobby and through the revolving door and into a cab. It was in the cab that the anger arrived, not the jagged, breathless anger of the night before, not the hot first wave of shock and disbelief. This was different. This was the cold, precise anger of full understanding, the kind that arrives after the data is complete, when all the variables are accounted for and the picture is assembled, and there is nothing left to explain away. He had left her. He had left her while she was 7 months pregnant, on the day she closed the largest deal of her career for a woman at his own firm. He had done this without a conversation, without a phone call, without the basic human decency of sitting across from her and saying the words out loud. He had done it with a note. 20 words. As if 6 years of a shared life could be resolved by a note on the kitchen island. And he had done all of it without knowing that the woman he had spent 2 years quietly diminishing, the woman he introduced as she, is in finance, the woman he had apparently decided was not worth fighting for, had just been appointed to lead the organization that employed him. The irony was so complete and so terrible and so absolutely unplanned that she could not quite locate the appropriate feeling for it. It was not triumph. It was not satisfaction. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. It was the feeling of a truth that had always existed, finally becoming visible. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. "Caroline?" said the voice on the other end. Ruth Merritt's voice. That particular texture of a woman delivering a wound while believing herself to be offering a comfort. "I think you should know that Derek is staying with us. He has told us what has been going on." "Has he?" Caroline said. "He says you have been completely consumed by this work project, that he has felt alone for the better part of a year, that the pregnancy made things worse rather than better. I am not saying he handled things correctly, but I do think some reflection on your part." "Ruth," Caroline said. Her voice was very calm, the specific calm of a woman who is choosing, in real time, how much of her power to use. "Your son packed his belongings and left a 4-sentence note. I am 7 months pregnant. I closed a $100 billion deal yesterday. I do not think reflection is the action item here." A silence. Then, $100 billion. "Have a good evening, Ruth." She ended the call. The cab driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror and said nothing. She texted Miles Jennings, whose name Donna had given her 6 weeks ago. The fact that she had been given the name 6 weeks ago and had saved it was information she did not fully examine right now. "I need an appointment, this week if possible." The reply came in under 2 minutes. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I am not of the problem that needs to be fixed." She looked out the cab window at the city passing in the early evening light. Buildings and people and the ordinary, relentless machinery of a world that did not pause for anyone's personal disaster. She felt the baby shift, a slow rotation that pressed outward against her ribs. She placed her hand over her ribs. "I know," she said quietly. "I have got us." 3 weeks had passed. Caroline had learned some things about grief in 3 weeks. She had learned that it did not arrive in the order she expected. She had expected the worst of it immediately, in the first days, and instead she had been functional and precise, and almost eerily capable in those first days, moved forward by the specific momentum of necessary tasks. The lawyer, the firm, the paperwork, the logistics. The grief had come later, in smaller installments, in the cereal aisle of the grocery store, when she reached for the kind he liked and then put it back. In the car, stuck in traffic, when a song came on that had been playing the night they got engaged, and she turned it off so fast she almost dropped her phone. In the quiet of the evening, when the apartment felt not empty but wrong, as if a piece of furniture had been removed from a room and the proportions were off. She was 8 months pregnant now. The nursery was finished. Sage green walls, the glider she had ordered without asking permission, the one Derek had called a lot of chair, the small white dresser with the glass knobs she had filled with folded onesies in the evenings when she could not sleep. She had done all of it herself. She had assembled the crib on a Sunday afternoon using the instruction sheet and a screwdriver she found in the utility closet. And when the last screw was in, she had sat on the floor of the finished nursery and looked around at what she had built and thought, "This is mine. All of it is mine." The meeting with Miles had gone as expected. The custody arrangement for a child not yet born was complicated, he had explained. Primary residence with Caroline, structured visitation for Derek, building from there as the child developed. She had agreed to this framework without hesitation. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the note, she received a phone call from an unknown number. She almost did not answer. She answered because she had spent 10 months training herself to answer unknown numbers. The voice on the other end was young, uncertain, and direct in equal measure. "I think we should talk," the voice said. "I think you deserve to know, from me directly, rather than from second-hand information. My name is Paige Holloway." Caroline was quiet for a moment. "Where?" she said. Paige named a coffee shop. "Neutral ground. A place neither of them had history with. Tomorrow at 10, Caroline said. She did not tell Donna. She did not tell Miles. She went alone, which was probably not the advice any of the people who cared about her would have given. But she went alone because this felt like something that needed to be done without witnesses, in the specific privacy of 2 women who had been in proximity to the same deception. Paige was already there when Caroline arrived. She was sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, wearing a dark coat, her light hair pulled back. She looked younger in person than in the headshot on the Westfield organizational chart. She looked nervous. She also looked like someone who had decided to do the right thing and was going to see it through, regardless of how uncomfortable it was. Caroline sat down across from her. A waitress appeared. Caroline ordered decaf. Paige said, "He told me you two had been separated for a year, that the pregnancy was unplanned, and that you had agreed to co-parent without remaining together." "None of that is true," Caroline said. Paige's face did something complicated. "I know that now. I started suspecting things. The details did not add up. He would contradict himself, and then I looked you up." Caroline looked at her. "You looked me up. I found your LinkedIn profile." Paige paused. "You are not who he described." "What did he describe?" Paige looked at the table for a moment, then looked up. Someone who had checked out, who was work-obsessed and not present, who had left the marriage emotionally a long time before he did. He described someone who was too busy and too consumed to notice he was unhappy. "He rewrote me," Caroline said. "He made me into someone he could leave without feeling guilty." She said it without heat. It was simply the most accurate description of what had happened. Derek had needed a version of Caroline that justified his choices, and so he had created one. He had given that version to Paige and to his mother and possibly to himself, and everyone had accepted it because nobody had thought to look at the actual evidence. "Are you still with him?" Caroline asked. "No, I resigned from Westfield last week." "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Paige wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "He was not who he told me he was, about anything." She said this with a specific kind of quiet anger that Caroline recognized, not the anger of a woman scorned, the anger of a woman who had believed a story and discovered the story was false and was now doing the necessary work of untangling herself from it. They sat in the coffee shop for 30 minutes. They did not become friends. They did not exchange numbers. But something passed between them across that small table, some mutual recognition of having been used as props in a man's narrative about himself, and that recognition had a particular weight and a particular dignity. When Caroline stood to leave, Paige said, "I hope things go well for you with the baby." "Thank you," Caroline said. "I think they will." She walked out of the coffee shop and stood on the sidewalk in the thin autumn sunlight and thought about the specific nature of what had just happened. Derek had built a false version of her. He had distributed that version to the people around him. He had used it to justify the choices he had already made. But the false version had just been directly refuted, not by Caroline, by his own mistress, by the woman he had chosen over her. Even Paige, who had every reason to believe Derek's story, had looked at the actual evidence and found it insufficient. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, then she started walking. She stopped hiding the deal. This was the first deliberate act of reclamation, and she made it quietly, without announcing it, without ceremony. She sent Henry Caldwell a revised professional biography for the merger announcement press materials. She had submitted the same version of this bio for 8 years. A careful document, precisely accurate and strategically modest. It listed her credentials without elaborating on their scope. It named her role without naming what the role had cost her to earn. The new version said everything. Every deal, named and quantified. Every title, in full. Senior architect. $100 billion Whitmore Capital merger. The work she had done, stated plainly in the language of someone who did not require anyone's permission to take up space. Henry read it and called her within the hour. "This is the correct bio," he said. "I know," she said. "I should have submitted this one years ago." "Yes," he said simply. "You should have." She was 38 weeks pregnant when she returned to the office. Dr. Sowen had given her a maximum advisement of 38 weeks for full office days. She had waited until exactly 38 weeks, not a day sooner, because she had been working from home and managing perfectly well, and she had not wanted anyone to think she was rushing back. She had not been rushing. She had been ready. When she walked through the lobby of Caldwell and Mercer at 8:45 on a Wednesday morning, the receptionist, Margaret, who had been at that desk for 11 years, stood up. She started applauding. It was a small sound at first, Margaret's hands alone in the lobby, and then Donna appeared from the elevator bank and joined in, and 3 junior analysts who were waiting for the elevator turned and joined in too, and it was entirely too much and completely genuine, and Caroline walked through it with the expression of a woman who is not accustomed to receiving what she deserves and is teaching herself, carefully, to accept it. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. The integration plan was on her screen, the architecture she had built across 10 months of work. She scrolled to the Westfield Partners section. Employee roster. Transition schedule. Projected role assignments within the new structure. She scrolled to the M section. Merit, Derek. VP, Institutional Markets. Transition status, confirmed. She looked at the name for one moment. Then she scrolled on. She had a call at 9, a meeting at 11, a review session with Nora's team at 2. The afternoon was full in the way she liked it, dense with specific problems that had specific solutions. Problems that responded to intelligence and effort and careful attention. She worked until 6. She took the long route home, through the park, 2 blocks under the trees before turning toward her street. The air had that quality that October sometimes achieved, clean and cold and faintly sweet, and the trees had begun to turn, the maples going orange at the edges. She walked slowly. She was 38 weeks pregnant, and her feet hurt, and the walk was probably unnecessary in the most practical sense. She did it anyway. She wanted the air. She wanted the trees. She wanted the specific pleasure of moving through the world at her own pace, in her own body, on her own time. She did not owe anyone her smallness. She had understood this, intellectually, for some time. She was beginning now to feel it. 6 weeks had passed since the note. She was in the nursery. It was 3 in the morning, and the sage-green walls were dark in the low lamp she had bought for nighttime feedings, and she was sitting in the glider. The chair that was definitely a lot of chair. The best and most necessary purchase she had made in the last 2 months. She was 39 weeks pregnant. The due date was 1 week away. She could not sleep. This was not unusual at 39 weeks, doctor. Soan had explained this at the last appointment, the combination of physical discomfort and hormonal activity, and what she had described with clinical gentleness as the body's way of preparing for the transition. You will be very tired and unable to sleep simultaneously, she had said. Try to rest, even if you cannot sleep. Caroline had nodded and thought, I have been doing that for 6 weeks for entirely different reasons. The nursery was quiet. The white dresser with the glass knobs, the crib she had assembled herself, which she had checked for structural integrity approximately 40 times, the small bookshelf with the board books Donna had given her, and the 2 she had ordered herself, and the one her mother had mailed from Phoenix with a note that said, Every child needs to know this story. She sat in the glider, and she looked at the sage-green walls, and she thought about Derek choosing that color. He had held the paint swatches with real attention, flipping through them, holding them up to the window light. He had chosen sage and said, I think this one. It looks like something that will last. She had photographed the paint cans. She did not know why she was thinking about this now. She thought perhaps it was because the walls were the color he had chosen, and she was sitting in the room that color every night, and the room was beautiful and the color was right, and she had built everything in it herself, and she was alone. She picked up her phone. She did the 3 in the morning thing. She had been doing it for 6 weeks, and she had not stopped. She searched. How to co-parent with someone who is not present. Single mother, returning to executive role. How to trust someone after betrayal. She read the results without absorbing them. She was not looking for information. She was looking for evidence. Evidence that other women had been in this exact place, in this exact specific combination of pregnant and abandoned and professionally ascendant and devastated, and had survived it and had built something on the other side of it. She found it. She always found it. The internet was full of women who had survived worse than this and gone on to build extraordinary things. And she read their words at 3 in the morning, like they were dispatches from a country she was trying to get to. She sat for a long time. The baby shifted. A slow, full body movement that pressed against everything at once. That particular late pregnancy sensation of running out of room in both directions. 6 weeks ago, she had been sitting on this same floor, in this same chair, reading a 4-sentence note for the 4th time. She had sat in the bathroom on the cold tile and let the steam take the ink stain out of her cuff. She had lain awake on his side of the bed because her side was already occupied by the body pillow. She needed to sleep, and she had not been able to explain that to herself at the time, why she was on his side. Except perhaps some part of her had needed to be in a space he had recently vacated, to understand, through proximity, what his absence actually felt like. It had felt like silence, not the comfortable silence of a long marriage, the particular silence of a space that had been deliberately cleared. She had been so certain, for so long, that the marriage was difficult in the ordinary way. The way all long relationships are difficult. She had been so committed to that belief that she had been willing to remake herself, repeatedly and quietly, to maintain it. She had stopped wearing her good blazers at home. She had started saying, "I am in finance" at parties. She had stopped sharing her wins, her real wins, because she had understood, gradually and then completely, that her wins made him feel something he could not name gracefully, and she had loved him enough to try to manage that feeling for him. She had loved him so much she had disappeared inside it. Now she was sitting in a sage green room at 3 in the morning, alone, building a life that was entirely and only hers, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done, and also, in a way she could not yet articulate, but could feel in the center of her chest, the most honest. I deserved better than this, not said to him, said to herself, for herself, as a fact, not a grievance. She sat in the glider until the sky outside the nursery window began to change. The particular gray of 5 in the morning, then the thin, pale light of early dawn. A bird started somewhere in the building's interior courtyard. One clear note repeated. She stood up slowly, stretched, put her hand on the finished crib, and felt the steady solidity of it, the good wood, the work she had done with her own hands. 1 week, she said to the room. 1 week. The baby came on a Thursday, 6 days before the due date, at 2 in the morning, in the specific way that births arrive, without aesthetic consideration for timing or convenience. 11 hours of labor, Donna holding her left hand throughout, Dr. Sohn at the other end of the room, calm and precise in the way Caroline had come to rely on, saying almost there she is, she, a daughter. They placed the baby on Carolyn's chest, and everything that had happened in the last 8 weeks became, briefly and completely, beside the point, not erased, not resolved, simply set aside for a moment by something more immediate and more astonishing than any of it. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a great deal of dark hair. The specific compressed features of a newborn that somehow still managed to suggest a personality, a distinct presence already forming itself. Caroline held her. The baby's weight on her chest was the most concrete thing she had felt in months. She named her Evelyn Ruth. The Ruth was not for Derek's mother. She would never explain this to Ruth Merritt, who would inevitably choose to believe it was meant for her, and Caroline had decided this was acceptable. The Ruth she had in mind was the Ruth of the Book of Ruth, the story of loyalty, of women who chose each other when they could have walked away, of the specific courage of staying for someone who needed you to stay. It seemed like the right name for a child who had been present through all of this, who had kicked against Caroline's palm on the worst nights, who had been, in her own wordless way, steadily present through everything. Derek had been notified through Miles, as the custody agreement specified. He had not been in the hospital. She had not called him to be there. This was not a punishment. The custody arrangement would begin its structured progression once Evelyn was home and settled, and he would be present in his daughter's life in the ways they had agreed to. But tonight was not his night. Tonight was hers. Donna took a photograph, Caroline, the baby on her chest, her face exhausted and entirely open, looking down at Evelyn with the specific expression of a woman who has just understood something she will spend the rest of her life learning. She would post the photograph later on the professional network where her name now appeared in capital letters above a $100 billion deal credit. The caption would say simply, "New partnership." The responses would be extraordinary, mostly from women. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the hospital bed, with Evelyn in the bassinet beside her, and she listened to the small sounds the baby made in sleep, and she looked at the ceiling and thought about what came next. It was not the thought of someone afraid of what came next. It was the thought of someone who had understood, finally and completely, that what came next was entirely and only up to her. Evelyn was 6 weeks old. Maternity leave was officially 8 weeks. Caroline had been working from the dining room table since week 3. Evelyn in the swing beside her, the two of them oriented toward the window where the morning came in. She had not done this because the firm expected it. She had done it because the work was interesting and the integration timeline was not going to pause for personal circumstances, and she had discovered, somewhat to her own amusement, that she could draft a merger integration memo and monitor a sleeping infant with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. She had become very efficient. Henry called on the Monday before the announcement. "I want to make sure you are aware," he said. "The Westfield employee roster will be part of the public record in the announcement. The org chart will be visible. Derek's name will appear in the structure that reports to your division." "I know," she said. "If you would like us to restructure his placement for any reason, Henry." She held the phone and looked at Evelyn in the swing. The baby was awake, staring at the window with the specific, concentrated attention of a very young person discovering that the world has light in it. "Don't restructure it on my account. The chart is right. He belongs where he belongs." Henry was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "when I first put you on the Whitmore pitch, there were people on the board who questioned it. They said you were on a maternity track and it might introduce risk." "I know that," she said. "I assumed as much. I told them you were the best person for this deal, regardless of any other variable, and that suggesting otherwise was the actual risk." She looked at Evelyn. "Thank you, Henry," she said. "Do not thank me. You were right. I just had the sense to pay attention." On the Tuesday of the announcement, the press release went out at 8 in the morning. The coverage was immediate. By 9, the deal had been written up in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Her photograph ran in all three. The professional photograph, the one where she was standing in front of the window, looking directly at the camera, not smiling, simply present. "Caroline Merritt," it said. "Chief Integration Officer, Whitmore Caldwell Merged Entity, architect of the $100 billion Whitmore Capital acquisition." She read the articles at the dining room table with Evelyn in her arms. The baby was nursing, eyes closed, entirely serene, unbothered by the specific historical significance of the morning. Somewhere across the city, at Westfield Partners, the announcement was being read. She knew this not because she was watching, but because Donna texted at 9:15. 4 words: "Westfield is having turbulence." She sent back the nursing emoji. Donna replied, "You absolute legend." She set the phone down and looked at Evelyn. "I know," she said. "I know. Nora Ashworth called at noon. I have been watching the coverage," she said. "How are you?" "Tired," Caroline said. "Happy. I want to ask you something." Nora's voice had the particular directness of someone who had stopped allowing ambiguity to fill space that clarity could occupy instead. "I have been thinking about this for some time. Would you consider allowing me to be Evelyn's godmother?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. The question had arrived without warning, but her answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "I would." "Good." Nora sounded pleased in the quiet way of someone not accustomed to expressing sentiment, but committed to it when it mattered. "Good. They talked for another 30 minutes about the integration timeline. Evelyn slept. The afternoon came on slow and golden through the dining room window. This, Caroline thought, looking at the sleeping baby and the stack of deal memos and the afternoon light. This is what I built. All of it. 3 weeks after the announcement. Derek sent an email to her personal address. Not through Miles, not through the attorneys. A personal email. 4 paragraphs. The tone of a man who knew he was wrong and was attempting to approach that knowledge with some dignity. He asked if they could meet. He said there were things he needed to say in person. He said he thought they both deserved a real conversation. She read the email twice. She called Nora. He wants to meet, she said. What do you want? Nora said. I want a real conversation. I want him to understand what actually happened. Not for closure exactly, just for honesty. Then go, Nora said. But go for yourself. Not for him, not to explain yourself. You do not owe him an explanation of who you are. She thought about that for a moment. I am not going to explain myself, she said. I am going to tell him the truth. That is different, Nora agreed. They met at a coffee shop near the park. Plain, well lit, nothing atmospheric. She arrived 3 minutes early and was already seated when he came in. He looked tired, older in some indefinable way, as though the last 8 weeks had been a different kind of time than regular time, which she understood, because they had been exactly that for her as well. He sat down across from her, and for a moment they both just looked at each other with the strange familiarity of 2 people who had been very close and were now something else entirely. He asked about Evelyn. She told him the truth. Healthy, eating well, sleeps in 4-hour stretches, has the nose that runs on her mother's side. He listened with real attention. He was present. She would give him that. Then he said, I did not know about the deal, about any of it. I know you did not, she said. Why did you not tell me? She thought about this question. She had been thinking about it for weeks, not with anger, not anymore, but with the specific interest of someone who wanted to understand a pattern clearly enough to never repeat it. Because I had learned, she said, that my success made you uncomfortable. Not immediately, gradually. Over 2 years, I watched your responses shift. Early on, you were proud of my work. Then, you were quiet about it. Then you were distant. And I loved you, and I wanted the marriage to work, and so I responded by making myself smaller, by not sharing the wins, by saying I am in finance at parties, instead of telling people what I actually did. I did this for you, and it was a mistake. It was mine, not yours, but it was a mistake. He was quiet. I made myself a smaller version of myself to fit inside the marriage, and the marriage still did not survive. So I made myself small for nothing. She said this without cruelty. It was simply the most accurate account she could give. He looked at her with an expression she had no clean word for. It was not guilt exactly, though guilt was in it. It was something more like the expression of a man who has just seen something he should have seen a long time ago and understands with full clarity that the seeing has come too late to change anything. I never meant to make you feel like you needed to do that, he said. I know, she said. I believe you. And she did. This was the truth she had arrived at in the 3 a.m. hours in the nursery, in the sage green room. He had not deliberately diminished her. He had simply been unable to celebrate her fully. He had been smaller than what she needed, and rather than acknowledge that, she had tried to fit herself into the dimensions of his capacity. This was not villainy. It was ordinary human failure. It was the kind of thing that happened when 2 people stopped being honest with each other because honesty felt too costly. You are going to be a good father, she said. I believe that too. I want that for Evelyn. He looked at her, and she could see, clearly, that he was seeing her fully for the first time. Not the version of her he had constructed, not the manageable, dimmed version she had offered him for 2 years, but the actual full person she was. She let him see it. She did not say, "This is what you gave up." She did not need to. He could see it perfectly well without her saying it. They finished their coffees. They walked out of the coffee shop together and said goodbye on the sidewalk, civilly, with the particular care that two people exercise when they are trying to do right by a child they share. She did not look back when she walked away, not dramatically, simply forward. The following months were made of work and Evelyn and the specific satisfaction of building something that mattered. The integration proceeded on schedule. She worked 3 days from the office and 2 days from home. Evelyn in the carrier, strapped to her chest on the home days, the two of them oriented toward whatever window had the best light. The arrangement was unusual. It was working. In February, the first major integration milestone closed. Westfield Partners was formally absorbed into the new structure. The Westfield employees received their transition notifications, their new titles, their new reporting lines. Every Westfield employee, from the senior partners to the coordinators, including one Derek Merritt, VP of Institutional Markets, whose notification came from the Office of the Chief Integration Officer. She did not read his reply. She had Miles handle all communication between them that was not directly about Evelyn. This was not hostility. It was simply the appropriate structure. Evelyn was 3 months old now. She had begun, in the last 2 weeks, to smile. Real smiles, not the reflexive ones of early infancy. Smiles at faces she recognized. At Donna, who came every Sunday. At Nora, who had visited twice, and on the second visit had sat in the good glider for an hour and a half while Caroline worked from the dining room table. At her mother, who had come from Phoenix for 2 weeks and slept on the couch and made food Caroline did not have time to make herself. At Caroline. At her mother's face, which she now recognized as the face that was always there. There was a new client call in March. A mid-size fund, considering an acquisition, referred by Nora. The client's name was Richard something, and he came with a team of 4, and the call connected at 8 in the morning, and Evelyn was in the carrier, strapped to Caroline's chest, and the window was bright with the particular clarity of early spring light. The client introduced himself. He said his firm's name. He said, "We were told you are the best in the business for this kind of transaction." Caroline adjusted Evelyn slightly in the carrier. "I am," she said. She did not qualify it. She did not add a but or an I try to be or an I have had some good results. She did not soften it. She did not look around to see if anyone was uncomfortable. She said, "I am." And then she began to talk about the transaction. Evelyn made a small sound against her chest, the kind of sound very young humans make when they are comfortable and warm and exactly where they need to be. Caroline kept talking. That evening, she put Evelyn to sleep at 8:30 and stood in the hallway afterward for a moment, in the quiet that follows a sleeping baby. The specific good quiet of a house where the necessary work is done and the rest of the night is your own. She walked to the kitchen. She thought about the note on the island, the face-down folded paper, the 20 words. She had not framed it or saved it. She had put it in the recycling on the second day and not thought about it deliberately since. Some things did not need to be preserved. Some things only needed to be survived. She made a cup of tea. She opened the novel she had been reading since the previous spring, the slim literary one about a woman who reinvents herself after a loss, the one she had been putting down and picking back up for nearly a year. She was almost finished. She sat down at the kitchen island with her tea and read 12 pages and finished the novel and sat for a moment with it closed in her hands. The ending was not triumphant. It was quieter than that. The woman in the novel simply walked out of her old life and into the next one. She took nothing she did not need. She left the door open behind her, not as invitation for anyone to follow, but because she was done with locked rooms. Caroline set the book down. She looked at the kitchen, the clean counters, the glass in the drying rack, the good ordinary equipment of a life she had made. The kitchen light was on. She had turned it on herself when she came in from putting Evelyn to bed. Not for anyone else. Not as a signal, not as a language, not as a small gesture of love in the direction of another person. For herself. So the kitchen would be bright when she came to make her tea. So the room would be warm when she sat down to read. She sat in the brightness for a while, finishing her tea, listening to the ordinary sounds of the building, the city, the night. Then she went to sleep. Closing disclaimer: this content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team with the intention of delivering meaningful stories and life lessons to our audience.